Next up, man I've known for a long time, worked with him a number of years in different capacities, Mr. Claude Hill. Actually, we'll jump ahead just a few, but Claude is Claude's kind of a hybrid. He's not just the technical guy. He's been sales, he's been engineer, he's done a little bit of all of it. And he is a life member of the Audio Engineering Society, which means you have to have done it for a long time, quite a while. Let's go ahead and jump, because he's going to cover a lot of this in the interview with him. You'll find that out. And it was a pleasure to go down and spend time with him and his brother down in Manchester a couple of weekends ago and do this. So Claude Hill, you'll be up shortly.
I got out of the Army in January of 1968, early January of 68, after spending 4 years doing electronic intelligence, electronic warfare with a group called the Army Security Agency. Learned a great deal about recording and learned most of my electronics and all of my communication stuff there, with a great focus on magnetic recording. Went to work for 3M, was trained, and then worked daily out of the Washington, D.C. office near my original home in Virginia. The management team at 3M asked me if I'd like to move to Nashville and run the 3M office there for sales and service. So one of the customers that I was pursuing was Tom Paul and the Glazer Brothers, and were singing with and traveling with Marty Robbins. So I resigned from 3M, went to work for the Glazer Brothers, and finished building and equipping and running the Glazer Sound Studios. Hired a young guy there named Kyle Lenning, who was a music major and a brilliant young man, and he and I had quite a number of adventures.
Well, you know, he was the sort of glue there in terms of just keeping that place running. And he was technically was really great, really understood how everything was working. Something was not functioning properly, he knew how to fix it. But he was also great behind the console, had good ears and was really a good engineer.
Got to record the Glazer Brothers for MGM, got with Jack Clement producing. Also did Glazer Brothers individual songs and albums with Jimmy Bowen, with Jack Cowboy Clement. Got to record when it was Kenny Rogers in the first edition, which was 5 great players, singers from the New Christie Minstrels originally. They wanted to do a record, and they had a concept album, became known as the Ballad of Calico, which ended up taking up 2 LPs, 22 or 23 songs.
We just hit it off with Claude so well. He just was a very musical guy, and obviously knew what he was doing technically, and did a great job for us cutting virtually everything on the record, and did a beautiful job of that and the mixing. And it wound up being certainly not only our finest work, but still to this day I can tell you that Kenny says it's his favorite album. So I'll always remember Claude that way, and I'll never ever forget him. And I'm so thrilled to see him getting this award.
I had chosen actually to use the early MCI machines, a 16-track and 8-track, in that studio with the Flickinger console. The one that we had was very simple, but that made it wonderful. It just was dead quiet and clean as a pin. No automation, no VCAs, no technical complexity, just very, very reliable and everything. It was a great console. Dave Harrison had started Studio Supply Company, and Dave had been the the engineer originally at King Records in Cincinnati. And then they didn't have the money to buy a new console, but they needed a new console. And so Dave designed and built one. That console became known as the MCI JH400 series. 416 was the first one. Well, through Dave Harrison and his connection with Jeep and my connection with the tape machines that I needed at Glaser and others, I made the decision to leave Glaser. And I was talking with Jeep, and he said, well, what'd you think about coming down here? Jeep, who was originally from Mississippi, but they had moved to Fort Lauderdale, and he'd opened a hi-fi store there, which was called Music Center Incorporated, shortened to MCI later. And in the back of the hi-fi store, he built custom audio equipment. I moved there and became the sales manager, eventually got the title of vice president of sales and marketing and business development. And I built the MCI global distribution network for him. Late 73, early 74, I came back to Nashville. I had done everything that I felt I could do down there. I had built the distribution network. I designed the autolocator. I designed the light meters that went on the Harrison designed console. Instead of the U meters, I had designed the JH100 transport. I hand-built that transport prototype myself. I took it, I shipped it, got in the car, drove to the airport to Miami, flew to London. The transport showed up 2 days late, but still in time. And there's a picture of me and Ambrosius and Jeep Harned and Dave Harrison looking at this empty tape machine cabinet, no transport in it. That's a 16 track, was the first of the JH100. And that machine, along with a companion JH416 console, we took to the APRS show in London. It was the first time that we'd been out of the country with MCI. This was 1972, I believe, or 3. And took it to the APRS. And on the third day of that 3-day show, I talked to the man each day. His name was Simon White. Simon was the managing director of the Marquee, which is the place the Stones played first in Soho in London. And he was looking for gear for a studio they were going to build next to the Marquee and call it the Marquee Studios. And they were going to be able to record in the studio or from the stage of the club. And he bought that gear. But a guy named Reggie White was the first guy who came into the studio when it was finished a month or two later and cut his first record there. That artist is known today as Elton John. And the fact that Elton John's first record was cut on MCI gear in the Marquee studio in Soho became known all over Europe, and we couldn't build the stuff fast enough. And we put it all together into a product and did the drawings and did some prototyping and stuff. And Dave took that down to MCI to show it to Jeep. Jeep looked at everything, and he said that they were going to build their own console now. And I just looked back at him, I said, well, we'll build it ourselves. And that day we changed Pandora Systems to be Harrison Systems and went up the street and leased 5,000 square feet to build consoles in. Buddy Killen, Bob Montgomery, and Kelso Hurston, 3 of the biggest producers in Nashville at the time, had bought Sound Shop. They approached me and to do 2 things. One, to be the chief engineer there and to build a second studio, design and build a second studio there, and to renovate the original A studio acoustically and so forth. So I went over there and went and worked there about a year and a half. And as chief engineer of Sound Shop, I went to New York looking for a console. And that was the fall of '75, October AES show, and both companies were showing their new consoles. MCI was showing the JH500, and Harrison was showing the original Harrison 32 series. And I talked to Dave, and I talked to Jeep, and then he said, I'd like you to start a new company in Nashville to represent MCI. And that's how Audio Consultants started. And so I went back and within the month filed a charter for Audio Consultants, became the MCI dealer on the first of the year, and spent 9 years designing and building studios, mostly equipped with MCI gear. In 1977, Jimmy Johnson called me, and I went down and talked to the guys, and they had outgrown the studio on Jackson Highway. The city of Sheffield had offered them a huge building that belonged to the city for $1 if they would stay in Sheffield and build it into a facility. And so I designed and built that. We generally refer to that as Muscle Shoals Sound by the River. Few small acts have recorded there. Bob Seger, 20 platinum albums hanging on the wall. Bob Dylan's Slow Train and Saved albums cut there. Glenn Frey's Soul Searching, his solo album out of the Eagles. That went on until the mid-90s. It's the best of what I did, you know. Did we spend more money other places? Yes. Energy Studios in Houston and Benson out at Great Circle Sound. That's one of the biggest rooms in the planet. Did Studio de Dames in Paris. I did Marc Arion's studio called Studio Cathy in Oran, Brussels, outside of Brussels, Belgium, and near the big battlefield at Waterloo. Cut disco hits after disco hits there. Did work with Musicland in Munich and Arco and all studios in Europe. Was involved with Harrison and Polar, ABBA studio in Stockholm. Started building one studio at a time, and then before we knew it, I ended up with 10, 15, 20, I think at maximum 26 people. And so that went on from 75 all the way through about early 82. And I got a call out of the blue from Dave Harrison. And Dave and Sheila came over and asked me if I would consider coming back to work with Harrison as the sales and marketing VP. I thought it over and I decided to do that. So I sold all the inventory, paid all the bills, found work for everybody except for Eric Johnson, who was my sales manager at the time. Found work for everybody else and closed the business and went back to Harrison. And I went over to Dave and I said, I'm ready to come. I got one person left that doesn't have a job and I'd like to bring him with me. And Dave said, fine. And so I brought Eric Johnson with me, and he stayed on with me as part of my team as the national sales manager for Harrison for the Americas. And I went off and ran for 9 years, the global distribution for Harrison. That went through the middle of 1989. One of the things that we did at Harrison in the early 80s with our TV3 and TV4 consoles, Pro 7 and Pro 790 consoles, and was to convert the sound for broadcast television on a network and global basis from mono to 2-channel stereo. And the centerpiece of that was getting the business for Harrison for the Sarajevo Winter Olympic Games, which was on ABC and was the world's first live stereo global broadcast.
The fact of the matter is that Claude was responsible for a lot of really major things that happened in my life as an engineer and producer. When he and Dave Harrison had Studio Supply Company, they actually set me up with Leland Russell in Jackson, Mississippi. which eventually led to me working with Parker McGee, who wrote I'd Really Love to See You Tonight, which led to me producing England Dan and John Ford Coley. So my first hit record as a record producer, you draw a straight line to Claude and to Dave. Had some equipment. I was making my own recordings in college with tape machines. I had some Tandbergs and stuff, and I had this mixer. Claude said, let me see that thing. And the next thing I know, Claude, you'll appreciate this, this little Bogan microphone mixer, which I had to make some records with, got modified. These are Jensen transformers and mic pre's that are in this mixer, and this turned into an incredibly good sounding piece of equipment. And it's still here, and it still works. So thanks for that, Claude. Congratulations, Claude. I just think it's fabulous that you're getting this award by a lot of your peers and folks that have known and admired you for a long time. Congrats.
It's been a great career, and I've enjoyed it, and I hope my contributions have helped other people, and I would do it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Claude Hill. He has filled up 5 passports to the point they have added pages to his passport in all of his travels.
Claude, on behalf of the Nashville Audio Engineering Society, I'm proud to present you with this Lifetime Achievement Award, sir. Thank you for all. Thank you.
One of the things people ask me is how I got to Nashville. And it's been 50 years since I came to Nashville, working for 3M, as I mentioned. I've been blessed to do the things that Mike mentioned, studio and equipment, systems, sales, studio design, general pro audio engineering, and record making, mixing, and some live sound. I want to thank the AES for its very kind consideration and this prestigious award in recognition of what I've attempted and accomplished. I'd also like to thank a few other people, and I'll do that in just a minute. After I was trained at 3M in January and February of 1968, we finished my training in Camarillo, California, and I was asked if I would like to accompany one of the other 3M engineers, John Kirkaby, on a studio installation in Hollywood. I said, yeah, that'd be fine. So we went and put that equipment in. It was the 3M Dynatrack in the pre-Dolby days. And they asked us if we'd like to stay for the session. The artist was Frank Sinatra, with Jimmy Bowen producing and Eddie Bracken mixing, and about 65-piece big band. That was my first session that I ever saw in a real studio, and it was just a glimpse of what was to come. On an early 3M service trip to A&R recording in New York City in 1968, Irv Joel, A&R's chief engineer, asked me if I'd be interested in joining the AES. And when I said yes, he was my original sponsor. It was one of the best things I ever did, and I later became a life member. I recommend it to anybody with an interest in pro audio on any of the things we've mentioned that I have done and that the other people being honored here today have done. It's essential. One of my other close colleagues at 3M was studio recorder lab engineer Glenn Phoenix. Glenn has been the owner and president of Westlake Audio for many years now and is still a close friend and confidant. How I got to Nashville, In August of '68, I was sitting at home watching a preseason football game on TV, and Cal Everhart from RCA called me, said that they'd had a lightning storm and none of their equipment was working. I flew to Nashville and worked with the RCA team, which was then about 17 engineers. I focused on the machines, but in 3 days we got everything working again. When I came back to the studio after rest, Cal said, "You might enjoy yourself in Studio A." I walked back down the hall into Studio A, and I met Chet Atkins, Jerry Reed, who were in the studio overdubbing guitars on a Mickey Newberry album called Harlequin Melodies. And Al Pachuki was mixing, and Ray Butts was running the tape machine. It took me about 10 minutes to decide, so much for living in Virginia, and that I wanted to make Nashville my home. And as God would provide, in the next spring, my boss at 3M called me and said, "You've been to Nashville, hadn't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "You play guitar, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, would you like to live in Nashville?" And they moved me here in the spring of '69. You saw pictures of the Glazer studio. That's a picture of me and Chuck. Chuck is still with us, although infirmed. Tom Paul is gone. Jim is still with us, and I had the pleasure of hearing Jim live at the Llano, Texas Country Opry House last fall, singing Woman, Woman, and other great songs of his and the group. John Hartford wrote Gentle on My Mind, and he was signed to Glazer Publishing, the BMI company. It was the income from that that provided the money for me to build the studio, to equip the studio, and to run it. And my relationship with John, long since gone, but great man, one of the most prolific songwriters I ever met. We started the Newgrass Revolution, and that's one of several that got started at Glazer. But I recorded John there and at Sound Shop later, including a landmark aerial plane album and another album called Mark Twang, a solo album, for which we won a Grammy in 1975. We talked about G. Parna, dear friend and colleague, and to David Harrison. Dave and I, the years that we worked together were a total joy. Dave had been chief engineer at King Records in Cincinnati and come to Nashville after the death of the King's founder, and became chief engineer at Starday-King, because Starday bought the remnants of King. I did some live sound, and I'll just mention and thank, amongst these people that I'm trying to thank, Dolly Parton, who chose me to design and build her touring sound system for her first solo tour, and to tour 16 cities with her and mix those shows. Also did lots of records for Flying Fish and Rounder Records for Bruce Kaplan and Ken Irwin. And I got to record Mark O'Connor's first record when he was just 13 and had just won the Bean Blossom Bluegrass Fiddle Championship. The team we had at Audio Consultants was exceptional, and the work that we did, which we built so many studios, it wouldn't even be possible for me to name them all, but the work, just a couple. Muscle Shoals Sound, you saw some pictures for the big studios by the river. Master Sound Studios in Atlanta for Bob Richardson. Dave Purple, who worked for me, was one of the original Stax engineers. And Dave had gotten Grammys and awards for his work on the Shaft soundtrack. And he knew Isaac well, Isaac Hayes well. And after we finished our work in Master Sound, Dave and I recommended Isaac go there since Stack had closed. I made a total, I think, 22 albums there over the years, made Atlanta his new recording home. Benson was mentioned in the video, biggest studio I ever built, and one of the nicest, and produced a great amount of great contemporary Christian music. And then John Fry owned Arden Studios in Memphis, and he hired me and my team to renovate A, B, and C studios and to build Studio D. My friend Billy Gibbons and that little old band from Texas set up homekeeping in Studio D and recorded almost all their material there. I could go on, but I won't. I would say that the last 8 years, because it ties back into the video, the last 8 years that I worked in pro audio, I was working for Calrec Audio from England, and they built consoles you don't see often in Nashville. I think there have been one or two here, but today Calrec, and for the last 10 or 15 years, Calrec has built the highest tech, most reliable, most sophisticated digital audio consoles for live television. They're in almost every live television studio now, and in almost all of the major remote trucks that produce live television programs in the field. And that completed taking TV from mono to 2-channel stereo and taking that to 5.1 surround, which is what we have today with our high definition systems. So I'm sit here today very, very honored with this award and very blessed by all the opportunities been given me, and I'm proudest most of all the people that I've helped and had on my teams at MCI and at Harrison and at Audio Consultants and in the studios. And I thank you for listening, and I thank the AS again for this nice award. Thank you so much.
I'll take the